You're listening to the Modern People Leader podcast, where we go behind the scenes with today's top HR leaders and work experts. We talk to them about how they've gotten to where they're at, what they do every day, and what they see coming next for the future of work. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome, Shane. How you doing?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Doing really well. It's Friday. Obviously, we post these, I think 2 week lag, but it's a rainy day in Austin and it's quarter end. And both Daniel and I, we talk a lot about being founders and operators, and sales isn't the only thing, but it's a really important thing. And so quarter end, that's kind of on my mind as well. We're over here hustling, but it's nice to pause in our workday and come back to what it's really all about, and it's conversations. And we have a great one today. I'm really excited about today's conversation with you.
So am I. Love it.
Well, as you may know, we kick off every Modern People Leader with the same tradition. We call it Good News Stories. We all share work or a personal related story just about, from the past couple of weeks to kick things off with a little positivity, a little gratitude. We prefer that our guests go first. So if you have something.
I do. So I'll make it super quick. So I discovered last year that I actually have a healthy bee population in my yard, and specifically little mason bees. They look like flies until you get really close, and then they're just these gorgeous, like black and blue and green bees. So discovered this, made a little house for them, and then started learning about them, realized you actually have to take them inside in the winter so that they don't freeze. So I put them in my garage, thought, great, this is fantastic. Spring's going to happen. I'm going to pull them back out, and then everything's going to be magical. Well, it turns out that a couple weeks back, Utah had a real warm spell. Came home one day, opened up the garage, and found about 80 bees crawling around on my garage floor. Realized I had a bit of an issue on my hands. So my wife and I got a couple of pieces of paper and started scooping bees. And we had this bee rescue process, got them back into their home, got them outside. And so far, we're starting to see some really good activity. So bee rescue was successful. They're happy. We're happy.
Do you have like a beekeeper outfit or protect yourself or anything? Or were you just out there with like some...
No, that is arguably the question to ask. No, I do not. So
Okay.
we had one little incident with my daughter, but otherwise no stings yet, and we're good to go.
And these little guys, they don't have a big bite, right? Their sting isn't super aggressive.
No, they're not too bad. Yeah. And I think they recognized that we were there to help. So, they were pretty chill about the whole thing too.
Speaking of bee stories, Stephen, was it you that was with us at my father-in-law's ranch when we heard like the humming sound? Yeah. So my wife's family has a ranch in Mexico, and it's like 4,000 or 5,000 acres. And we were out there just doing like a ride along on the ranch, and we stopped somewhere, and all of a sudden we just start hearing like this like humming sound, like and we're like, where is that coming from? Like, it sounds like bees. And so finally we get out and we look down, and there's these little holes like everywhere in the ground. Apparently in that part of Mexico, and I'm guessing South Texas, there's this particular type of bee that creates hives underground, and they're everywhere. And so I don't know. Do you remember what those were called, Stephen?
I don't know.
They might be called mason bees. They might be the same kind of bee that I've got. They ideally like to make these little mud huts in the ground. So we may be dealing with the same bees.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That would be crazy.
That's fantastic.
Well, I'll go next because Daniel kind of touched on mine a little bit, and it'll make more sense in a sec. So I have two, both personal. First, we share a lot of our personal lives with our audience, Shane. So excuse us for a minute while we get through our good news stories. Our wedding date, I've been engaged for about a year, and our wedding date is on lock. So we're getting married first week of July. And it's going to be a destination wedding in Costa Rica. And it's only like immediate family, small wedding. And there was a lot of stress about the date because I co-parent. And so the girls are going to be a big part of the wedding. And so, but it's complicated. And so I'll just say the good news is people are unblocked and there's a registration page that has like all the details, more details than you could ever want. And so that's exciting. The next major thing is we need the venue, but we have a few, we know they're available, and we just need to kind of make our choice. The other thing that Daniel was just touching on is I also confirmed my bachelor weekend. Having been married once and also being 48, a bachelor party just didn't interest me. Like that just didn't feel like the move for where I'm at in my life. And so having been to Daniel's family's ranch, the in-laws, I had an idea, like what if just my closest family and immediate friends were to just go to the ranch. The food here, Shane, is insane. You've never had homemade Mexican food like the food at this ranch. Like the meats are all cooked on mesquite fired wood grill outside. So we're going to spend like a few days there just hanging out, eating some good food, maybe shooting some skeet. I don't know. That's not really my thing, but I'll do it. It sounds fun. So that's my good news story.
Wow, that's fantastic. Congrats, by the way.
Thank you.
And I guess that gives me my answer on whether or not I can share this with my brothers. So
there you go. Yeah, it's official. It's official.
Okay, so my good news, I also am going to go personal. This week was my wife and I's 3-year anniversary. And so we went to our favorite place to get fajitas, this place called La Piscina in Austin. Highly recommend it whenever your team is here. I think it's at the Proper Hotel, and it's on the same floor as the pool, hence La Piscina. And then this weekend, I'm going to do a quick little weekend trip with 2 of my brothers. They're both very into Dead & Co. And so Dead & Co. has a residency at the Sphere. I've never been to the Sphere. My little brother's been. And so that's what really intrigues me. I think like the visuals and the entire experience will be a lot of fun. Plus I get to hang out with my brothers for a weekend. But yeah, it's my good news.
That's wonderful. That's fantastic. I love the idea that you shared the good news to start. Kind of puts things into the right tone, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
This is probably my favorite part of the podcast, the good news
Excellent.
stories. And so, yeah, what's the Shane Koller story? Like, where did you start your career? How did that lead you into the people function? And then how did that lead you to Ancestry?
Yeah. So interestingly, I didn't start in HR. I actually started a doctoral program in psych and was to the point where I was managing a client load and just recognized that while I love human behavior, I didn't necessarily love that aspect of it. So around that same time, I started auditing a number of the MBA courses and realized like that's the part of human behavior that I absolutely love. Like, how do you ensure that people can show up as their best selves, that they can really do the work that they want to do and that the company needs them to do? Like, how do you actually unlock that? So that was what originally got me away from psych and into the people world. I realized very quickly after that that it doesn't just start magically that day when you decide to move into HR. So I had to kind of pay my dues and started a bit in the healthcare space in HR and then worked my way into technology. And that's really where I've spent the bulk of my time, is in tech companies, number of startups, but some big players like Adobe, and just recognized that technology was really, what was closest to my heart. So have stayed with technology largely in my career and just recognized that the intellectual property side of human, kind of the talent equation, is really what I love doing. I love intersecting between what the company needs, what the person needs, how do we unlock all of that potential. So that's really been my story. And I've just followed different opportunities where I felt like I could make an impact. I could be part of something that was growing at speed. I love the messy, chaotic startup process. I love trying to make sense of that from a talent perspective. So that's really what's driven me. But I recognize that I wanted to have, a few experiences with companies that had gotten to scale and, to see things working at scale. So I made a couple of stops in larger players, and then Ancestry's kind of been like the best of both. We are very well established. Company's been around for 40 years. And yet day to day, we kind of operate like a startup in a lot of ways. So that's kind of what's led me to Ancestry, is just really like one interesting story after another. And I just kind of follow those stories. So that's where I am today. Absolutely love what I do, love the people I'm working with. So it's been a good journey.
I think most of our listeners will be familiar with Ancestry, but for those that aren't, can you give us just a quick rundown on what you do and maybe a peek into like, some of your newer products or kind of where things are going for Ancestry?
I'm also
Yeah.
surprised to hear that y'all been around for 40 years. Like,
That's
I would
same.
have thought like 20, 15. I don't know.
We've had a lot of iterations. Like we were back in the day, we were building books for people, or we were using
Mm.
CD-ROMs and things like that. So we've had a lot of iterations, a few different names over the years. So it hasn't been Ancestry all the way back in time, but Ancestry as a concept, as a product, yeah, we're 40 plus years into it. So yeah, I mean, just to explain really briefly, Ancestry is we really are the global leader in both family history and consumer genomics. And so the thing that people oftentimes don't realize is that we have this superhuman mission. And the idea is to help people find their own story as well as their family's stories, and then to be able to share that, to be able to craft around that story and just kind of realize like who they are, what are the strengths that they have, where do those strengths come from. So we combine that with incredible technology. When I think about the scale of our business, we have, just to talk about the concept of like a family tree, we have 131 million family trees with 16 billion with a B people in those trees. And our job is to connect all of that information, all of the rich records and stories and all of that, connected in a way that people can then say, who am I? What is my story? And we can serve up that, those rich stories to help them find that. So that's really what we've done. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars investing in that, so that when people get on the site, they don't have to worry about all of that detail. All they have to worry about is like, how do I find my story? So that's really who we are. We've been doing it for a long time, 24 plus million people in our DNA database, super focused around privacy, right? Because we recognize that's some of the most sensitive and personal information out there. So we put a lot of emphasis on allowing people to do that in a way that respects their privacy and the security of the information that we're serving up to them.
I mean, you're in the storytelling business as much as,
Mm.
you are in like the other things you do. I'm curious, is there like a story that jumps out at you, or like when you're at a party and people are like, God, tell us a cool story about Ancestry, like anything that you can share with our listeners?
Do you mean from my own personal family history,
All of
or
the
just
above, or just from the company in general, or like any kind of unique story that you heard or been a part of, like either way.
Mm. We have arguably millions and millions of stories. I subscribe to an internal feed that every week they'll share more stories that customers are sharing with us. And I love that. And I pass that on to my team, and, we're like crying and laughing at the same time. So there are millions of those stories. I will say that, like, from my own side personally, when I started discovering my own family history, I found out that I have a great, great, great plus grandmother who was friends with one of the local Native American tribes, and specifically their chief. And this was at a time when the territory was being settled. Grandmother, who was friends with one of the local Native American tribes, and specifically their chief. And this was at a time when the territory was being settled and there were really fractured relationships between the settlers and the Native American groups. And she had established this amazing relationship with this Native American chief. And there was a time when another tribe had come to see if this settlement group was going to cause trouble. And so they were coming fully armed. And this other chief came and interceded and shared with them that she was a friend and that they had her protection, or he had protected their family. And just learning about that, and then learning about this great great grandmother, just made me recognize that, like, we have some incredibly strong people in our past. And when I think about my own family, it's not hard to see some of the connections there. So it gets really personal very quickly when you start discovering your own family.
Oh my God. I have so many questions, but I also know this isn't an Ancestry podcast, but thank you for sharing. And
Absolutely.
I'm going to segue us into, what we want to talk to you about today. And that's
Please.
something that we love. And any recurring listener knows that, well, both of us at this point, but I think I'm probably the more vocal about my passion for the concept of people operations as a product, or EX, employee experience as a product. But the notion that there is a better way, a more modern way of managing an HR team, and that's centered around the employee experience and looking at that experience as a product that needs to be managed. It needs to be iterated. It needs to be improved. There needs to be marketing. There needs to be yada, 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 yada. And so I love this product. And today, this is all we're going to talk about. And when Daniel shared that with me, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be great. And so there's a lot we want to cover. So I'm just going to jump right in. And
Please.
I feel like everyone that is bought in to this way of thinking, or maybe just even interested, like had a moment when they were like, oh wow, like I get this, and like I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I've got to pursue this. And I'm curious, did you have a moment like that, or the Ancestry team? And if you did, like, can you share with us what that looked like?
We've had a lot of chief people officers come onto the show, and if there's one thing that they have in common, it's that they run their org their way. I think of people like Crystal Boyson at Sprout Social, who completely rethought performance reviews for her company, ditched long form questions, created 3 clear ratings, which they then can auto calculate into a final rating. I think of Carmel Galvin from Clavio, who ditched the generic way of measuring quality of hire and built a custom framework tailored to each team. I think of Jessica Zvan, who tracks LTV to ECAC to evaluate every single manager. Like, these are the exact kinds of people leaders who wish they had a tool like ChartHop. And for those of you who aren't familiar with ChartHop, ChartHop is a flexible people ops platform and HRIS that brings in all of your people and business data into one place. So think, HRIS plus having the ability to bring in data from places like Salesforce. And they let you customize key processes like headcount planning, compensation, performance, and engagement exactly the way that you want it. No rigid templates, no one-size-fits-all playbook, just the flexibility to build the systems that you truly believe in. With ChartHop, you can really run your org your way. If their platform sounds like something that you want to learn more about, I highly recommend that you go request a demo. Just go to charthop.com and make sure to let them know that we sent you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did have one of those moments, had many of those moments, but the one that really sticks out to me is I recognized we were doing like a review of all of our programs. We had some new people on the team, and I realized as we were reviewing all of the programs that we had, whether it was performance management or the promotion process or calibration, right? Like I had this moment where I recognized that we had built over the years excellent programs. We were executing on those programs in a really strong way. But I realized like when we tried to fit all of those pieces together, suddenly it was like, huh, we're getting a lot of information from these individual programs, but that information is not connecting across the program. And the data is not connecting in a way that we could say, let's take the information that we've got from the calibration process. Let's connect that as part of our promotion process. Let's connect that to our learning and development programs in a way that then actually changes the way that we make decisions as a team and changes the way that we interact with our customers as customers, not just employees. Like I had this moment where I thought, we really will come up short if we just have a whole bunch of programs that we do really well at, but none of that really connects together. And if you were to ask our customers, they would say, yeah, sure, they do a good promotion process, but I would never have thought that it connects to how I calibrate as an employee or how I learn and grow. And so that was the moment where I thought, we need to be structured more and more like a product team. And the other thing I would share there is that for me, part of that came naturally because I was leaning in really heavily to the company, to our own product team, and recognizing what they were doing for the Ancestry product. And it started to hit me that if we're not thinking in a similar way, we're not really achieving what we're going after. So that was kind of the moment that made me think we've just got to shift our thinking a bit.
Well, I've got a couple of questions, but I'm going to start with one. You mentioned that you noticed that the programs were disconnected at times, and you mentioned calibration, you mentioned learning programs. If you had to pick one where it felt like the experience was a little bit like wonky or it just like felt
Mm.
totally disconnected, was there one in particular where you were like, this just doesn't, like, it doesn't connect, like this is all wrong?
Oh, it totally. Our year-end performance process, we call it YEP, right? Like we came up with that really fun name, right? Like we thought everyone would love YEP. Well, they first of all don't care what we call it. What they care about is how do they experience that program? And what we realized was we put a lot of time and effort, and then they have to put in a lot of time and effort into this program. And the only connection that they were really making was that depending upon how this goes, my year-end bonus, my merit increase is going to be impact. That was really the only connection that they felt to it, as opposed to this is the culmination of a series of conversations that should be happening throughout the year to help me understand where I am now, where I'm going next, and what the gaps are, between any of those periods of time. And so that was really the one that stuck out immediately.
And the other question that came to mind, you said, you were looking at the product team and thought to yourself, we're a product organization. Like we should be operating more like a product team. It reminds me of a prep call that I had recently with somebody who works at Airbnb, and they explained how every team at Airbnb operates around like the same like sprint planning process, or like they're all like aligned on product launches, I think is actually what they said. So they
Mhm.
have like 2 or 3 big product launches every year, and every team including HR aligns to those product launches. And so just curious, is that similar to how Ancestry operates, or is that like the future vision?
Yeah, that's the future for sure. We're doing it within the company. We've aligned marketing, product engineering around those big launches. And that's been a fantastic change over the last few years. But that's future state for us in the HR world.
And so one of the things we were as often happens before we hit record, we like kind of go into the conversation before and Daniel gets super frustrated because he's like, guys, can we stop? Because this is gold. One of the things that we were talking about, a few kind of pillar concepts within people operations as a product, and the notion of the shareholder mentality and the importance of this particular pillar, because by having a shareholder mindset, you're beginning to, I feel like there's an extra lens that a
Mm.
prioritization. You want to be even more confident that what we are prioritizing and what we are about to do is the right thing to do. It will grow revenue or it will decrease costs. And which is typically the most basic way that this has been related to me, right? And so what does that mean in the context of a people team? And how does it shift how you build your HR programs when you have this mindset?
Mm. Yeah. So I actually learned this initially from my CFO at Ancestry. He's been with the company for over 16 years. He's now our CEO, and he
Mm.
probably is like the penultimate version of someone who has shareholder mindset. Every decision that he makes is through the lens of what does this mean for our shareholders? Does this provide value to our shareholders? And customers are tightly linked to that kind of mindset. So he was the one who really first kind of got me down the path of incorporating the shareholder mindset into the HR world. So what that did was I started thinking, and our team started thinking about ultimately, what is Ancestry's goal? What are we trying to do for our customers, for our shareholders? And we realized that it was family stories, it was individual stories. And so everything that we do as a company is about making that happen, because if you make that happen, you provide value to your shareholders. You provide value to your customers, that provides value to your shareholders. And surprisingly, we didn't always have that linkage in place within the people. We called our people and places team. We didn't always have that linkage. And so what we started to do as a team, and it goes all the way back to our annual strategic planning, it went back to the vision that we've built for talent at Ancestry. We started to make that laddering more concrete. And so we always start our strategic planning with, what are the company's strategic initiatives and priorities for the year? Where do we see talent implications in each one of those strategic priorities? And then how would we ladder that down to the work that each of our teams does? And that was really one of the first things, because what that does for us is that ensures that we're prioritizing the things that the company is prioritizing for its customers, which then again flows through to the shareholder value, right? And so the change was pretty miraculous, because if I look at past years and the work that we had done to create our priorities, there was always this lingering commentary within my team, like, okay, yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but I'm not really sure if I understand how it's all connected. And the first like full cycle with strategic planning that we did where we incorporated this was in our last cycle. And I remember that the team, unscripted, unsolicited, were like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. Like, I can finally see a real clear link between what we're doing and what the company is doing. And that has just increased the buy-in that our teams have around the work that we're doing. We implemented a QBR as well with our Director Plus population in my group. And I can tell you, being fresh off the first QBR of the year, that the teams are now, we have all of the drivers of our various work streams coming and presenting on the work that they're doing. And what I hear them talking about more is our employees as our customers, because if we make our customers happy, our customers make Ancestry's customers happy. And so we've just created a much tighter linkage. And it's because we're no longer thinking of ourselves as a subject matter expert who builds HR programs because they're a best practice. Instead, it's like, what is the value that we can uniquely deliver to our customers that allows them to do their best work? And that's the shift that I'm hearing and seeing within my team. And it wouldn't have happened if we weren't thinking about our shareholders ultimately and the value that we can provide.
So what I'm hearing is it starts with the shareholders. How can you provide them value? You then have the business strategy and priorities that come out of that. From there, the people and places team priorities. And then I feel like the next layer down, or the next linkage, would be finding the moments that matter for your customers, for the employees. And it's funny, like, I feel like this language started to emerge maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, or I'd started to hear it a lot more. I used to work at Humu, and something that we would talk
Okay.
about a lot were the moments that matter. And I feel like maybe Humu was a little ahead of their time. I feel like if they would have popped up today, maybe they would have blown up a little bit more. But yeah, focusing in on those moments that matter. Like, how have you began to, like, one, identify those moments that matter, and how are you thinking about augmenting each of those moments?
Yeah, love that question. So we started by using one of the concepts that product organizations use, which is the journey mapping, right? The customer journey mapping. And so we went through that entire process. We're still going through that process because it's very iterative, right? You never finish that, but we've created what is now a much more circular journey than we had ever thought about it before. I think in the past, we would think of a lot of our work as linear, when in reality, it's a journey, and journeys are kind of circular and they have inputs and outputs. And so we first started by mapping the employee experience. because we didn't even know what we didn't know when we started that process. And so we implemented a number of different mechanisms that helped us to make sure that we were hearing the voice of the customer as we were doing that mapping. And from there, we then, and none of this is like innovative in its own right, but like we recognize that we have these key milestones throughout the journey, right? You've got the attract, you've got the onboard, engage, develop, perform, exit, all of those pieces. And then you have a lot of touch points in between. And from there, we started to look at the data that my team had around things like exit reasons, exit timing, a lot of the qualitative data around exits and onboarding, right? So we looked at each one of those milestones and we said, what data do we have? What metrics are we tracking for each one of those things? And where do we feel like we have gaps? And what I'll say about Ancestry as a company, and I absolutely love Ancestry, we run a very lean ship. We're private equity backed, which means that we're never far away from like, what is the budget that we have to use here? And we recognized immediately that we would not have the resources nor the budget to hit every single moment across the employee experience or the employee journey. And so we looked at the data that we had access to say, what do we believe we're already doing really well? And so we can kind of keep that on maintenance mode. And where do we have gaps that actually matter? And we realized for our population that the development process was one of those moments that matter. Because we're a small enough company overall that we don't have tens of thousands of employees and therefore this constant hum of people coming and going. So the idea of being able to develop our people was even more critical because we couldn't just say, if you stay and perform for 3 months, you're going to get the next promotion or the next development opportunity. We had to be really mindful of what we could do to help our employees develop. So that was just one example of an area that we knew that we needed to focus on. So as part of that mapping process, we've then identified a roadmap of the areas within the employee experience that we're going to put our priorities against. And again, going back to the model of strategic planning, we had to make sure that those also had some alignment to the company's priorities, right? So that ultimately the work that we were doing, we weren't off going in a slightly different direction. We were actually facilitating what the company needed to achieve. So it's been a fantastic process. It's required a lot of effort on the part of our leadership team, my leadership team, to really be focused on like, is this going to move the needle or is this just something that we're doing because we think we have to?
So this is great. This is like a masterclass kind of conversation. I can already feel it. And so you reorient the thinking about HR, the function, the work you do. You realign that with a shareholder mindset, and you, with that, adopt a customer-centric view on everything, right? If we're not aligned with that, that's a great way. Like that, things become really clear. Okay, is this in or is this out? You conduct a full kind of mapping, customer journey mapping. In this case, the employee experience. You look at all the segments. I'm guessing you're like taking in data as well. So like you're looking at survey data, maybe like, okay, for those that are listening, I'm getting a head nod. And it sounds like you start to establish how we're going to define success. So you along the way, you quickly mention metrics. And this is actually, well, at least in the courses that I've been in, this is a big part. And so I'm just curious, like what metrics, if you're able to share, did you land on?
Of course.
And then I have a few more questions after that.
Absolutely. So I'll mention a few and we can certainly go into more detail to the extent that obviously at a certain point we're sharing private information. But when you track it to what product organizations oftentimes care about, it's things like NPS, it's things like engagement, retention. So we have our own NPS measures within the people organization. We have tools that capture that at different moments, right? Because the NPS metric itself is something that's captured at a number of touch points. So we capture it during the attraction process, the onboarding process, the development process, and then we have it as part of our employee engagement pulses. So NPS has been a big one for us. And of course, we segment it to the different parts of the journey, whether we're talking about candidates, employees, alumni, right? But then our engagement metrics are very key. We're actually in the midst of a bit of a shift in our engagement approach, where we're thinking more about questions that pack a lot of power to them. They're a little more outcomes focused than kind of traditional engagement metrics. So that's something that we're right in the midst of as we speak. But then on the retention side, we're actually starting to track metrics that are more leading indicator of retention as opposed to, oh, we lost a bunch of people, let's figure out why. So we're now getting into a lot more depth around time in position, time since last promotion. And again, these are metrics that have been around forever, right? But connecting them to the employee experience so that they actually drive work that you do, so that we can start to identify hotspots across the organization, right? We have critical talent, key talent that have been in role for longer than we would expect before having development or growth opportunities. So those are the things, some of the core things that we track, in addition to, of course, a mountain of other metrics that just help us run the business.
And so perfect. So now we have the gates of the moments that matter, the key points in which we're looking. We have a measure of success. We know where we're doing great. We know where we have areas for improvement. So now we can start to prioritize our work, right? And so how do you get to you mentioned, as you did that in your case, it was super, it pointed to a very specific process. And so now you have to start executing on the work. And so I want to talk a little bit of how do you have to mobilize a team? What did that look like for Ancestry? Because you're a 40-year-old company, you've had HR for a long time. So how do you go from the HR team you have and shifting that to this different model? Because it is a pretty different model. It leverages a lot of the same skill sets, but it's different.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the first things that we did, because we recognized that the structure of my team was going to be so important, is we actually restructured a bit. So we've had the role that we call people partners or people business partners. We've had that for some time, but historically it was a little bit more administratively focused, right? It was helping employees and leaders with the basics of how they operate as employees. And then we had our individual subject matter experts, right? Whether it was total rewards, payroll, things like that. And what we did is we actually reorganized into a different role for our people partners. They're now much more of a strategic partner to the business. And we have layers within that team for people who are kind of focusing on certain populations or levels versus others. And then we reorganized our operations team into shared services versus centers of excellence. And that's where for us, we believe the magic is really going to happen. Again, we're somewhat early days off of that reorganization, but what we're now doing as a team is really focusing on those people partners being the kind of key voice of the customer. They are so embedded in their organizations that if there are things happening, they're hearing about it first. And then what they're doing, because we built the structure, they're then coming to the centers of excellence. They're coming to the shared services to make sure that we've got things that are responsive to those developing needs. And that's been a bit of a change. And so we're now building the touch points that allow the shared services, centers of excellence, and our people partners to come together to recognize, if we're hearing certain things within the business, how would we shift our priorities, for example, on the talent development side? What are the things that we've been working on that we need to shift or we need to tweak, right? I'll give you a specific example. We recognize that one of the areas where we had a bit of a gap was for new managers. We kind of took the approach that we're going to give you the basics and then it's a little bit of sink or swim. And we realized that there were a number of areas across the business where we had managers who were struggling. And, that was our fault. Again, not thinking as much about our customer as we needed to. We then recognized that there were more resources that we needed to provide to that group of individuals so that they could then act as a multiplier to their team. So that's been kind of an early win for us to recognize that we needed to approach the work a little bit differently and to be agile enough that we could pivot when we needed to. And because we've already got a very well established roadmap of work that we do, we could then say, all right, do we need to actually make a trade-off? We have what we call a no or not yet list. And it's an actively managed list because we're a lean team. So at any given time, we can't do all the work that our people want us to do. And so we maintain a no or not yet list, and we have very specific parameters around that. Are we saying no, or are we saying not yet? And so at any point in the process, if we need to pivot, we can then say, does this fit into the roadmap in some way? And do we need to, change the amount of resourcing that we provide to this? And then we have to make trade-offs. So that's been an early part of the process. That's one of the ways that we're actually activating and operationalizing this whole HR as a product mindset.
All right, so MPL Live Boston was pretty big for us. We sold 90 tickets. We had an NPS of 100, so perfect NPS, up from 82 at our first event in Austin, and it ended up being the biggest MPL Live that we've done so far. And so now we're gonna head to San Francisco, and we think that it's gonna be even bigger because one, SF is our second biggest market, and two, it's home to some of the most iconic guests that we've had on the show. People like Brandon Samet, Debbie Shotwell, AJ Thomas, Q Hamirani, Andrew Bartlow. I mean, I could list off probably another 4 or 5. And so we're super pumped to be doing this one in San Francisco. We love the city. And so here's the plan. MPL Live San Francisco is going to be happening on Thursday, June 5th from 2 to 6 p.m. in downtown SF. More details on the venue coming very soon. Tickets are going to be $99 for early bird. We're expecting 100 plus HR leaders this time. And just like Boston, there's going to be a mix of structured convos and unstructured networking. And we're going to be doing a live podcast with some badass CPOs. We haven't announced the speaker list yet, but it's pretty exciting. And for the people that have never been to an MPL Live, I'm just going to read off some of the fire one-liners from MPL Live Boston. One that comes to mind is from Carmel Galvin when she said, "Stop treating employee surveys like your Aura ring." Like that one, that one hit pretty close to home for me because I would obsess over my Aura ring scores for probably a good 6 to 8 months. Or when Stacy Ritchie from Smart Cat dropped, stop asking for headcount and start asking if AI can do it. And so these are the kinds of insights that you're going to get at an MPL Live. They're a bit longer episodes than the ones that you would get here, but the benefit of that is there's going to be, multiple Q&As throughout the episode, and we're going to go much deeper than we can go in some of these 60-minute episodes. And so if this sounds like your vibe, it's a super low pressure way to meet some good people, have some real conversations with people leaders in the San Francisco area, and there's going to be a lot of energy in the room. These events are a lot of fun. And so yeah, tickets are live. Go buy them now with the early bird pricing, and I hope to see you there. You've mentioned the roadmap a couple of times, and so I'm curious, I'm envisioning this year-long roadmap, or maybe it's a never-ending list with this no, not yet list. But have y'all also changed how you plan on a monthly basis, on a bi-weekly basis? Are you operating in sprints? If so, is there an assigned scrum master by team? I have a lot of questions. Have y'all gotten that far yet?
Not quite that far. We're definitely thinking more in iteration cycles, and I think the sprint concept is a little more, I wouldn't say chaotic right now, but I would say it's not fully stabilized to where we could say we run in 2-week, 4-week sprints, whatever the case may be. So that's something that is coming down the line for us. Right now, what we're thinking about more is we're really focusing in on the employee experience and what we're calling moments that matter. And so for us, the road mapping that we do, the pivoting that we have to do is really focused around the employee experience in those specific moments that matter, and what we'll incorporate as the team is able to digest kind of this change in approach is the idea of sprints.
Quick, this is a bit of a random question, but this has been a great conversation. And I just want to go back to, well, it sounds like this is still a work in progress. And I think this is a type of
Very much.
initiative that is, it's agile in its own right, right? So it is a continual work in progress. And so I think that
Yes.
I say that knowing that that's exactly where you guys should be. And so how important is the CEO's mindset in all of this? Because I just wonder, are all CEOs going to be okay with a work in progress? I don't know. When I go back to the story for Ancestry and I think about where we started, and it was with the shareholder mindset and your CEO, former CFO. And so that has to be a critical part of this. And so I'm just curious, like, what advice, tell us a little bit about that experience with your CEO, the ongoing conversations that you all have about this, and what is your advice now, having learned everything that you've learned? You kind of have this superpower knowledge, right? And yeah,
Mm.
I think you do. And so what would you recommend to those that might not have that kind of buy-in, or their
Mm.
CEO isn't just quite there in the journey yet? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Could be the subject of books and podcasts, right? In its own right. So the first thing that I would say, and if I look back at my career, one of the common threads in it is that the times that I have cared about the things that my CEO cares about are the times that I've had the closest, most aligned relationship with him or her. And so and that sounds like, well, duh. I mean, that everyone would want that. But in reality, what that meant was, instead of me coming to my CEO with, okay, it's time to do this program again, and hey, I need you to remind so and so, and we're only at 50% compliance. Instead of that being the subject of conversations, it really is focused on what's keeping you up at night. What are we not doing well as an organization? And then conversely, like, what are we nailing right now? What are we doing that we should lean into? And the more of our conversations that went that direction, and importantly, me listening instead of talking, the more that I got my CEOs to open up about what they were concerned about, the more I could then connect that back to the work that we should be doing or that we were doing. Because I know my CEO cares about the shareholder. I know they care about our customers. And when my conversation shifted to be more of that, it was less about what programs I was building. And it was more about, like, how am I aligning my team and my own mindset to the things that they care about? Because then, not to forget the other part of a really good relationship with a CEO, I could then be much more tailored in how I coached my CEO around some of these issues, right? And instead of talking about things for the sake of this is an HR best practice, I could start talking about it in much more specific terms to say, hey, if you're worried about our leaders' ability to manage talent, then we can talk about that, because I don't have to talk about HR programs so much as I need to talk about, yeah, actually, you know what? I know that person that you're talking about. I know the team that you're talking about. My team knows them. And this is how we're thinking about some of the gaps that we have. And so to me, it's really caring about the things that your CEO cares about. And then the second piece that I would just add to that is learning the business well enough to speak the language of the business. If I don't know how we make money as a company, what products we offer, if I'm not using those products myself, if my team isn't using those products, then we're not speaking the same language as the CEO, as the senior leadership team. And so that's been an education that I've asked each one of the people on my team, and especially my leadership team, to do is, and we have time built every week to be in our own product, so that we're speaking the language of the business. So I guess that's where I would start, is really caring about the things that the CEO cares about.
I feel like part of running a people team more like a product team, or just like having this product mindset, this agile mindset, is to fail fast. So
Mm.
you're putting out, you're putting out an MVP, you're getting feedback, you're iterating, you're relaunching. And so when you think about some of the fail fast moments, I guess first question, how long has this journey been? Like how deep into the journey are you?
I would say if you think about it as like a fully iterative process, we're probably a couple years into the journey.
Okay. So
Yeah.
a couple years in, that's pretty, I wouldn't say like super deep in, but it's not
Mm,
brand new. It's not like
right.
2 or 3 months in. And so when you think back to some of those early days, like were there any fail fast moments that you kind of, I don't know, I feel like some of those big fails are like the most memorable, and kind of like fun to laugh at. Like a few years later, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe we did that. Like me and Steven have moments like that all the time. And so I'm curious if there are any stories there.
Oh, yeah, plenty of stories. The one that I would probably share right off the bat. So, a previous CEO of mine, she was actually a product leader by background. She ran the product organization for a very large tech company. And one of the first things that she and I did when I took on the role and she was new to the company is we just spent like 3 or 4 hours with one another, just talking through anything and everything, personal, business, everything. And and that was a fantastic intro. And then shortly after that, we ran our year-end process. And she came to me midway through that process and she said, Shane, I just got to tell you, the product of your year-end process is terrible. It's just terrible. And she said, I'm a user of this product, by the way. Because sometimes we get the feeling that CEOs don't want to actually go through the same process that the rest of employees do. Oh no, she was like deep into this product. She was using every feature that we had, and she just said, this is terrible. And we had made some tweaks that we thought were so responsive, and we were excited about these tweaks. And I realized spending some time with her that we were making tweaks based on what we thought was the right iteration on this, not what our customers thought. And because she was a product person, she was one of our most important customers. And so I put my team in touch with her, and we went through a cycle of iteration, listening to her feedback and then getting her perspective on like who else in the organization should we be talking to. And that was a fantastic process. I have to say, just honestly talking, we have not closed every gap that we identified as part of that process, because that's where limited budgets come in. And so the MVP, right? That's a really important concept, because I could have in the moment said, well, actually, you know what? We're going to go on pause until we can build the perfect experience for our people. And instead, I had to say, we're going to come up with a roadmap of changes that we're going to introduce to this product. And we're going to talk to you about those changes. We're going to talk to our customers about it. So now when we go through these various processes, we're talking to our customers like, here's what's happening now. Here's what's coming down the line so that you can see where we're going. So that fail fast was a really good refresher for me to say, like, I don't have to wait until everything's perfect. I've just got to get that MVP out into our customers' hands and then be ready to listen.
I think that's such a great example, and I think that's one that everyone, a lot of HR leaders will relate to, honestly. And so I'm always baffled, but we're near that time where we have to like turn the corner and bring the conversation to a close. But I have one more question, and that's, what do you want our listeners to take away? Like, if there's one thing about this topic that you would like for them to take away from this conversation, like, what is that?
Mm. I would say reach out to every person that you know that's been through this process, every resource that you can find. One that I used early on was a book called The Lean Product Playbook, Dan Olson. And I got that recommendation from a leader in our product organization. He's like, if you want to learn about product, go here, start there. It's great. We were in a book club together and all that. So I would just say that to anyone starting this journey, you have to open yourself outward. Don't try to do this on your own. There are people that have been through this experience. There are resources out there. Try to capture as many of those resources as you can. And then if I can sneak in a second, it's learn your business. learn your customer. If you do that, you may not incorporate every single product concept, but if you know your customers, you'll be successful, guaranteed. If you don't know your customers and you're trying to make it more academic, you're not gonna get the spirit of what you're trying to do. So learn your business, learn your customers.
I think that's great advice. And on the first point, to reach out to as many people who have gone through this process as you can. I mean, I would recommend that you reach out to people like Crystal Boyson. Like, I hear so many
Mm,
parallels between the work that you're doing and the work that her and her team at Sprout Social are doing.
love
Yeah.
that.
So I feel like there's an intro that could be made there. And
Happy to take it.
and I feel like, shameless plug, but this is something that I know Steven has been obsessed with for the last year and a
For
half, two
real.
years. I don't even know how long it's been.
Excellent.
It's
And I'm not going to give too many details, but in mid April, so maybe like a week or so after this goes out, we're going to launch something that's called MPL Build. And we've partnered with somebody who is pretty well known in the space for running your people team like a product team. And yeah, there's going to be like some DIY resources. There may be going to be like
Love
some
it.
more like meaty programs for people that like really want to get into it. And so I'll put a link to join the waitlist to be the first ones that find out when this goes live. But yeah, I mean we could talk about this topic all day. So
Love it.
but we do we do have to get to rapid fire questions.
really quickly, one of the things I've learned in the work that we're doing that Daniel's referencing, he's being very cryptic, by the way, and so
Create intrigue, Steven.
okay. I just want to be like, blah, this is what we're doing. In the research, we have seen there are two distinct groups, camps within this subject matter, and there are those that are like 101. They're just trying to understand, like, how does this all work? What is it? This is all new language, and I don't really understand it and get like, I'm conceptually, I just want to know how it works. And then you have
Mm,
those that are like, how do I set up a sprint planning meeting? There's like the detail people, like the 301 type of conversation. And I would hope as you progress through, you'd be open to coming back, because I think there is like a follow on part two to this conversation where we could go even deeper on some of the things. But we wanted to cover as much broad stroke as we could with you, because we
makes
love the
sense.
journey and the story that Ancestry's on. So before I forget, like, I think there is a follow on to this, and I hope maybe someday we could have you on to have that conversation. But
Fantastic. 1000% in.
all right, sorry, Daniel.
Oh no, you're good. I think that's a good call out. All right, so rapid fire questions. We ask the same set
Yes.
of questions to every guest, and yeah, we try to get through them as rapidly as possible. So, question
Excellent.
one: what's one piece of advice that you'd give to someone starting in HR today?
I'll reiterate what I said earlier. Learn the business, learn your customers.
If your team gave you a superpower, what would that be?
If I think if they like named me as a superhero, they might call me the empathizer, because I spike really high on wanting to understand what our customers are thinking, what they're feeling. So maybe the empathizer. Empathy is maybe the superpower.
That's a good one. If you could steal one strategy from another company, what would it be?
Oh, I think it would be, like I think about companies like Google and others that have like this really robust employee experience platform. It's like that extra ability to bring it all together in a really cool, cohesive way. I would love to steal their strategy around their EX platform.
And our last question is, if you can think of someone that, absolutely needs the spotlight in terms of the work they're doing in the HR space, who would that be? Like, who should we have on to the show next?
Ooh, can I answer your question in a slightly non-conventional way?
Of course.
All right. I would actually say bring more product leaders onto the podcast to talk about what their thoughts are for the people space. Like, how could the people space mirror or think
Mm.
about their work as a product organization?
Do you have any product leaders you think would be open to an HR conversation about product?
Ooh, I do. I would probably want to get their take on it,
Of
but
course.
yes,
It's a
absolutely.
great idea.
I will give you some names.
And we actually, one of the people we're going to have on is a former design leader who's now running a people team. And so,
Ooh, I
yeah,
love that.
yeah. They're not
That's
like officially booked
fantastic.
yet, so I can't say any names, but I'm really excited for that one.
Very
All
cool.
right. So our final tradition is called one word or phrase close. So a word or a few words to describe how you're feeling. Maybe it's like the one word takeaway from today's conversation. It could be whatever's coming to mind for you.
Mm, I would say aligned. That's the word that comes to mind.
What do you got, Steven?
I'm going to go with guru. I feel like Shane, you're just like sharing a small fraction of like what you guys are doing over there, and in the way and ease you speak of this topic is it's just been a really enjoyable conversation. So thank you.
My pleasure.
I'm trying to think of like some sort of like analogy that's connecting a beehive to a people team running like a product team, but I can't think of any. So I'm just gonna say hive, beehive. I don't know.
Nice. Love that.
Well, thanks so much. This has been a great convo. Like I said earlier, it's been a lot of fun. We love it when, someone is as passionate about the things that we are passionate about, comes onto the show and has a bit of a chat. And so thanks again for joining us.
Daniel and Stephen, it's my pleasure. Love talking with both of you.
It's a lot of fun, guys. Have a good weekend. Bye.
Have a good
Thanks.
weekend.
You too
Bye.
as well. Safe travels.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Modern People Leader. We really, really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating. It would mean the world to us. And connect with us on LinkedIn. We want to know what you think about the show, and you can find links to both of our profiles in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and see you on the next episode.